Welcome to Magnus Theatre. My name is Thom. I'm the artistic director here. This is something we call Looking Back at Magnus, wherein I get on a video call with people who have been significant in the history of this organization. Now, from the early 1970s to the early 1990s, Mario Crudo was a fixture in the Vancouver professional theatre scene, both as an actor and as a director. At one point, Mario had directed 3 shows that were running concurrently in 3 different theaters. In the early 1990s, Mario turned his attention to arts management, and he got a job in Thunder Bay, where he would ultimately become the longest-serving artistic director of Magnus Theatre. Over his 23-year tenure, Mario changed the face of this Canadian regional theatre, ultimately overseeing the construction of Magnus's current home and the move from the east end of Thunder Bay to the north end of the city. Here is half my conversation with Mario Crudo. When you came to Magnus, you were and you remain a well-respected theater artist. You came for the challenge of, let's build a new space. How did that split your focus? Did you allow it to split your focus? Or were you able to just go left brain, right brain over the course of a 12-hour day? Because you're programming, you're directing probably 90% of the productions at Magnus, and overseeing this, because you're the constant in the 23 years that you were at Magnus. As an arts administrator, overseeing a capital campaign, as an arts administrator overseeing a construction, as an arts administrator also performing the duties of artistic director. I mean, what was that for you? Because you programmed some incredible seasons in those days.
I came from a theater where Bill Millard was the artistic director. That's the Arts Club Theatre in Vancouver. Yep. And Bill did everything, like everything. Yeah. He was the financial officer. He directed the shows. He chose the actors. He auditioned. He did everything. So that was my growing up in the theater, in a sense. I was with the Arts Club for 14 or 15 years.
Okay.
And I started off as an actor with the Arts Club. I stage managed at the Arts Club. I was crew. Backstage, I did a number of different positions there. But what I knew of the, and I have to admit, in those days, I had a lot more energy than I have now. But even now, I keep myself very, very busy. Yeah. Right now, I direct all that energy into my garden. Right. But then I directed it into the building, into the plans, and what we would do for into the building and into the programming, which I loved. I loved, having a say in what the audience would experience. Yeah. And I loved being with actors, and I loved being in the rehearsal hall. I seem to be re-energized by that experience, by the rehearsal hall experience, by seeing something develop from words on a page. Mm-hmm. And that was very, very exciting for me. And I had never done that before. I had certainly directed many, many shows at the Arts Club. And I was used to, as I told you earlier, there was a period of time where all 3 theaters were shows that I had directed.
How did your artistic process change over the 20 years that you were there from the time? I mean, certainly, working process has always changed, going from venue to venue. So from the East End to, finally having an on-site rehearsal hall at Magnus, I imagine, because you and I have worked together a couple of times. You're very efficient in your work, and you come in prepared and you're ready to go. Is that something that developed over the years, or has that always been Mario Crudo's thing?
I think it's something that's developed over the years. It's funny, because I could have worked the way I work now when I directed. I could have worked that way long before, but I didn't have the confidence. Right. I attended the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art in London. And I wanted to go there because in Vancouver, I had seen people on stage, actors who had gone there. And they had my respect and admiration. They were so good. And I knew I wanted to go to theater school. I wanted to go to a place and get my training. I didn't want anything else to interfere with that. So I applied and was accepted for Lambda. And it was an amazing time for me. I loved it. It was a 3-year course, and it was wonderful living in London, where I got to see some incredible theater. In fact, one of the pieces I wanted to talk a little bit about today, I'll mention it now, is Peter Brook's Midsummer Night's Dream. I saw that at the Aldwych Theatre.
Oh, wow.
It opened, I believe, in 1971. It opened in 1970 at Stratford-on-Avon in England, and then was transferred to the West End at the Aldwych Theatre. And I was lucky enough to see that. That was an amazing production. And that production was the reason that I opened the new theatre with Midsummer Night's Dream, because I was inspired by Peter Brook's production and wanted to do something. I wanted to do something special for the theater, and here was the new theater. Here was the new Magnus Theater. It was a dream that had been realized. So it all kind of seemed to tie in. Anyway, while at Lambda, getting back to the original question, while at Lambda, I learned how to approach a script from an actor's point of view, of course.
Yeah.
But that actor's point of view, I felt it was later on that I thought this could easily be used as a way to approach a script and find out what is the writer's intent, what are the words saying, how one should play this. And I thought this could work for a director, as well. Now, in my early days of directing, I was too self-conscious and to follow that routine, to follow that path. And a couple of times when I did try to do it, I was working with older actors who basically would say to me, "Oh, Mario, we know the lines. We won't bump into the furniture. We'll just, we'll do it this way." I thought, okay, fine, And so it was a completely different approach that I had. It was later on, I have to say, even when directing for the Arts Club, I think I slowly started to introduce things that I felt comfortable with in terms of my approach to how to direct a play.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it has to do with a number of days of table work, which you do as well, Thom. And I think that's so important. I've had actors. Not all, but I would say most actors in plays, most of the actors that I've worked with loved that process because and we have 3 weeks rehearsal.
Yeah.
Mind you, when I first started, we did it in 2.5 weeks, including tech.
Yep.
And that was really because that's what the Arts Club did, and it was to save $1.
Do you feel that the art scene in Canada has changed over the time that you were at Magnus? Do you see any great shifts in the time that you've been working in the theater?
I think that the biggest shift for me, and I think it's because I looked for it, I think the biggest shift was that the table work that happened early on and the table work that happens now, I think for me personally is more valuable now. And the reason for that, I think, is because everybody knows what each moment is meant to be. You discuss it. You can still be free with it and you can still discover, and it's going to be a little bit different each night, but everyone is in the know. Yeah. Whereas in those early days, we all had our vision. Everyone had a separate vision. Yeah. And that's why when I think back to some of the early things that I directed, some of which were still very successful, I think, wow, that person was following their path and this person, but what was the overall message of the play? What was the content of the play? Were we doing right by the play? by doing that. And so I think that the biggest thing for me, however one approaches the directing, is that now when the play is ready to open, generally speaking, we all feel good about the work that we did, and we hope that the audience is going to respond in a positive way and understand what we've done. Do
you have an artistic highlight of the time you were at Magnus? I know you directed Trafford Gansey twice. Your production came from the Arts Club before you were the artistic director here. It came and was performed at Magnus. And then in the first season in the New Space, you did it.
Yeah, actually, it wasn't an Arts Club production, that first one. It was in 1982 or 86, I believe. Okay. And Brian was the artistic director at that time. And he brought me out to Thunder Bay to direct it. That was the production with Henry Cherney.
Okay.
And Juliette Daum, I think her name was, and Anne Wright. It was an amazing production because the theater was transformed. This was at the old space, on McLaughlin Street. And I brought it back because I wanted to transform the theater at Magnus. That was one of I loved that whole having the audience around. You can't do that all the time, but it's great. I mean, you've done that a couple of times with Valley Theater and so on. And it's great to do that, to throw a little surprise and surprise your audience every once in a while, eh?
Absolutely.
But I think, one of the plays, there are a couple of things that stand out in my mind. One is Waiting for Godot, which I always wanted to do. And Vince Metcalf, he comes up in my mind with that play, and Sean Williamson. And they both were, the whole cast was wonderful. But I can tell you that I had more response from that play probably than any other. Positive response, but also there were some negative responses as well. In fact, I know that in one of the matinees, an entire row did not come back after the intermission. They just, they didn't like it. But on the other hand, I had some wonderful emails from people loving the production and really applauding the fact that Magnus would put something like this on.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a highlight for me. The Rez Sisters was a turning point for me. Thompson Highway. He was coming up to the north here because he was visiting areas in the north and doing some work with some young people.
Right.
And I had programmed the Rez Sisters. And we got together a couple of times while he was here. This was before rehearsal started. And he asked at one point, he said, who's going to be directing the play? I said, Thompson, I haven't really decided on a director's yet. I'm thinking about it. And I had never directed a piece by an Indigenous writer before. And he said, well, you should direct it. I said, why would I direct it? I don't know that world. I don't know the culture. He said, Mario, how the hell are you going to learn if you don't do it? And he kind of opened my eyes to that because there's a lot of talk about appropriation of culture and so on. And it was Thompson who made me feel comfortable enough to direct the piece. And I did. I learned a hell of a lot. It was a wonderful cast. It had Gloria Eschenbach in the cast, and she was playing a different role, but she was the original production of Rez Sisters years ago that I saw at the Vancouver East End Cultural Center,
right?
Because it toured across the country. Anyway, he made me comfortable enough to direct the show, and as I say, I learned a lot by doing that. And I also directed Drew Hayden's Taylor's play, Dead White Writer on the Floor. And I mentioned that because that was a big turning point for me as well. It was quite a risk, I felt, in terms of the play. It had been turned down by a number of theaters, Drew had told me. And I felt very honored in that the preface to the published version of the play mentions Magnus Theatre and the strong support that he received from Magnus on that production. And he said some very kind things about me as well in that preface. So those certainly stand out. A Closer Walk with Patsy Cline stands out in my mind, and only because it was a wonderful production. This was in the first season in '92, and 92, 93 season, and it was a huge success, and so I thought we should bring it back in the summer. And it was I believe it was the first time that Magnus had done a summer production of any length. Magnus may have done something, but certainly not a 2-week or 3-week run.
Well, not a theater,
yeah. So this would have been in July of I guess 93, July 93. We brought it back. And I don't know if it still holds this record, but it ran for 5 weeks because we kept adding weeks on to the remount, and it was highly successful. In fact, I seem to remember that we couldn't run any longer because we were now into end of August, beginning of September. And people hadn't had their holidays. Poor Betty was going crazy at the phones, and she hadn't had any time off. So we had to close the show. And I think you may know we brought it back. I think it was 2011, 2012, somewhere in there.
Magnus Theatre had been looking for a new home since the late 1970s. When Mario first arrived in 1992, he took up the task that all the previous artistic directors had been working toward. It took 10 years for that dream to be realized, and then another 10 years for Magnus Theatre to be completely debt-free. That was all down to Mario Crudo. Thanks, Mario.